A very interesting thing happens sometimes when I'm dealing with certain vocal SDA pro-trinitarians. What happens is you will bring up a fact, and they don't like that fact, and so they try to overthrow it by falsehood, by just saying it isn't true. Like if you bring up an influential person in Adventism and show something that they said with respect to the Trinity that doesn't mesh with what these vocal pro-Trinitarians want, they'll just try to say, oh no, that person isn't really a significant influence in Adventism. And that type of approach happens all the time. Well, the latest is that someone is making that claim about this gentleman, Max Hatton. Now, Max Hatton is actually one of the most influential pro-Trinitarians within the Seventh-day Adventist Church. According to him, he is actually the first Adventist who wrote a book entirely dedicated to that subject, and this is that book. And, you look in this book, and let me turn to the page. I'm not going to go into all of it. I think there are quite a few errors in it, but you see here in the end, answers to objections to the doctrine of the Trinity. The objection: where in Scripture is the doctrine of the Trinity clearly taught? The answer: the doctrine of the Trinity is clearly required by Scripture, but is nowhere fully explained therein. The words of some theologians are helpful to the situation. So, by his own admission, it's not actually explained in the Scripture. Nowhere will you ever find it explicitly stated, but he thinks it's required, and he uses the words of theologians to try to prove that. Now, what I will tell you is that if you accept the teaching of this book and you follow it to its logical conclusion, you are going to reject Ellen White as a prophet, or you're going to denigrate the process of revelation inspiration and say that she got things wrong, and you'll just pick and choose out from her writings what you want. And I will prove to you that that is the case with this book and the logic that it uses. But before I get to that, let me just show you the influence here, okay? You see on the back, there is a claim that this book was endorsed by Focus magazine, that's a magazine produced by Andrews University, as the best defense of the Christian doctrine of the Trinity in the last 50 years. Well, that's a mighty powerful endorsement, isn't it? And you will actually, if you go online, you'll see this is Max Hatton's, one of his books. This one was specifically written for Seventh-day Adventists, and he says that there was no book wholly dedicated to the subject until his book, Understanding the Trinity, was published in 2001. And of course, that's this book. And you'll find various references to it. For example, this article by Gerhard Pfandl, I probably really mispronounced that, but you'll see down the bottom here, because of the resurgence of anti-Trinitarian views within the Church, 2 books on the Trinity have been published in recent years. Max Hatton's book, Understanding the Trinity, does not address the Adventist situation, but focuses on the biblical material and responds to attacks on the doctrine of the Trinity. Then, of course, there's Whidden, Moon, and Reeves' book, The Trinity, which we will look at here in a second. And these are referenced here in the Journal of the Adventist Theological Society. Well, if you go to Ministry Magazine, you'll see a list of books and that they recommend if you want to gain a better understanding about the Trinity. Now, most of these books are from scholars and ministers outside of Adventism. But right there on this recommended reading list is Max Hatton, Understanding the Trinity. Now, again, what I am telling you is that this book, if you accept it, you are going to end up rejecting Ellen White. And again, some of my SDA pro-trinitarians, these are individuals who really have an agenda. They try to downplay this when you show them the truth here. They say, oh no, it's not really a big influence, or it's not really very recommended in Adventism. But we're already seeing some evidence that this isn't the case. Let's look at some more. This is the book by Whidden, Moon, and Reeve. And if you open it to page 30, who do we find reference? Max Hatton has provided some helpful comments. If we continue in this book, page 93, Max Hatton puts it in a slightly different way, and he's quoted there all the way to here. We continue in this book. Let's flip over to page 98. Max Hatton offers a couple interesting preliminary observations. Well, let's keep going. Who do we have referenced here? Hatton. What do we have here? Max Hatton has suggested, right? Let's keep going. Who do we have here? Page 109, Hatton comments, right? Let's keep going. Page 111, here we again have Hatton. Page 112, here we have Hatton. And then we see this endnotes about Max Hatton in his recently released book, Understanding the Trinity, presents a more extensive treatment of texts used against the Trinity and the full deity of Christ. His highly readable paperback is now available in North American Adventist book centers, right? And we see, as the reader will note, we have drawn on a number of Hatton's observations in the balance of this chapter and its supplement. And then, of course, they have another reference to Hatton there. So what we're seeing is that this book by Whidden, Moon, and Reeve has a strong reliance on the book that came before it, which is Understanding the Trinity by Max Hatton. And this is a clear endorsement found in this book of this book. Now, ironically enough, these individuals have a completely different conception about God, but we won't get into that now. Here, we're going to now move to another book. This one came about 7 or 8 years after this one, and this is Systematic Theology, God as Trinity by Norman Gulley. And if you open this book to page 16, you'll find that he references back to Whidden, Moon, and Reeve, right? Going back to this book. But not only that, he gives a very good endorsement for you-know-who, Max Hatton, right? He says, I have found his book, Understanding the Trinity, to be insightful and helpful to this study. So you can see there's sort of like this piggybacking off of the various books. And again, I'm trying to tell these individuals that they dispute these things, so I have to show all this evidence. This is a very influential book in Adventism. But as I said, if you actually accept it, you receive it and follow it through to its logical conclusion, you are going to end up rejecting Ellen White or denigrating the inspiration of the testimonies. Here's the proof. This is Max Hatton's website, and he has an article on Ellen G. White and the Trinity Doctrine. Now I'm going to scroll down, and we're going to take a look at something here. Okay? Here, Max Hatton claims that James White wrote against the Trinitarian Creed And he says, was this perhaps part of his attempt to condition Ellen away from the Trinity Doctrine to his belief? Ellen would still have been a teenager at this time. So he's going to lay a foundation to try to make it seem like the things that Ellen White wrote were just because she was being influenced by the other pioneers. Here we go. We see it. James White, and I guess others, were successful in helping persuade the young Ellen White to accept that God does have body parts. How they could reconcile this with the fact that he is plainly said to be spirit is quite beyond me. A body would place severe limits on God and confine him to particular places constantly. Now, ironically enough, Ellen White prophesied that this type of thing would come in that would attempt to make God a non-entity, and Max Hatton is fulfilling that prophecy, whether he realizes it or not. But let's keep reading. Our pioneers were clearly going down a wrong track, and for whatever reason, Ellen White was now going down the same track with them, right? So we see that he's opposing Ellen White. Look here again. Not long after I became an Adventist, I was quite astonished to read a statement from Ellen White which says, man was to bear God's image, both in outward resemblance and in character. It's Patriarchs and Prophets, page 45. Hatton says, I was quite puzzled by this. I had recently spent well over a year intensely studying things about God that caused me to become a Trinitarian. Now could I accept that God was much like me to look at? I was busy with other things and didn't understand how the statement related to other matters in Ellen White's writings, so for the time being, I just let it go at that. Now, I can see this was from the pen of Ellen White, who had been conditioned to be a Semi-Arian. God looks something like me? How could a single human look something like the Great Spirit Trinity God, who is everywhere present at the same time? The statement of our dear lady does fit the Semi-Arian God quite well, but certainly not the Trinitarian God. Should we not heed the warning of Isaiah 40, verse 18? And so you see very clearly, Max Hatton's view of the Trinity does not mesh with the testimony of Jesus through Ellen White. And he's very, I guess, comfortable in saying that, Ellen White has just got this matter wrong, okay? And then you can see here that he quotes these other portions from Ellen White's writings, early writings about the Father having a person and form, right? And now listen to what he says, and he's very wrong, very, very wrong about this. We have to conclude from these statements, and he's talking about these statements from Ellen White, that Jesus did not share the glory of the Father. This is not what we would expect from John 17, verse 5. The fact that Mrs. White says she saw in vision that Jesus and the Father are quite separate individuals does not fit with the Trinitarian concept found in Scripture. Now, again, there's just more that's happening here that he's just basically going against what Sister White says. And so again, my point here is that if you follow this book to its logical conclusion, the very author of this book, you are going to negate the testimony of Jesus by Ellen White. And so what we see here is you see all of these references where these theologians are piggybacking off of each other and pointing back to this. It is dangerous, and it is Satan's foothold where he's weaseled in and he's sowing his seeds to get people to turn away from the testimony of Jesus, which is a resource that God has given to us to help us understand the Bible better and to be corrected if we err from the truth. But if you start saying that, oh, well, The pen of inspiration was influenced. She was conditioned there. She was going down the wrong track. It doesn't fit. Then just do the logical thing and say that she's a false prophet and remove her. But this he does not do. And the crazy thing is that where are the Seventh-day Adventists, pro-trinitarians, calling this nonsense out? They're just actually endorsing it over and over and recommending it, that you should read this work if you want to understand better. So this is a problem, and we need to understand it and be aware of it and receive the warning from God. All right, my friends, Maranatha, God bless. I hope this helps you.